Welcome to Toon My Heart. Yes, that's Toon as in cartoon. Because in this podcast, we'll be taking a closer look at popular animated movies through a Christian lens, in search of faith-relevant themes and traces of eternal truth. I'm your host, Tracy Harold. And just a disclaimer, I'm not a Bible scholar, nor am I a film scholar. I'm just an animation fan who loves Jesus, and who wants to explore how the themes and ideas presented in some of my favorite films might resonate with the Christian faith and help remind us of what we believe, in sometimes surprising ways. So I hope you'll join me as we get animated about our faith. Welcome to another episode of Showtune My Heart. In these special episodes, I and a guest discuss a song of their choice from an animated movie, looking at it through a Christian lens, of course. And my guest for today's episode is Faith Moore. Welcome, Faith.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So, Faith is many things. I think first and foremost, she would probably say that she's a mom.
That's right.
She's also a book editor, a writer who's had multiple pieces published in various national publications, and she's the host of a podcast called Storytime for Grownups. And that is a podcast that helps listeners learn to love and better understand classic literature like Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice. It's kind of like an audiobook, but with you stopping occasionally to explain things that might be confusing or unfamiliar to modern readers, right?
That's exactly right. Yes, it's a podcast that is supposed to help you learn to love these books that maybe have felt like they were inaccessible to you. So I think for a lot of people, there's embarrassment around not understanding some of these classic books, and we sometimes pretend that we've read them. And I have been a person who didn't quite understand these books when I felt that I should. So I read the books out loud. I stop from time to time to give little tiny explanations that don't interrupt the flow of the narrative. And then I take questions from people where we talk a bit more about the book. We're currently reading The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which is a fantastic, little-known classic. So it's lots of fun. I love doing the podcast.
Yeah, it's such a simple but really brilliant concept. I listened to the first episode of the Pride and Prejudice season because Pride and Prejudice is one of my favorite books. And I just wanted to get an idea of what your podcast was like before we had this interview. I really only had an intention to listen to that one episode, but I got hooked. So I think I'm on episode 4 or 5 now.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm so happy to hear that. And I say that people are either Pride and Prejudice people or Jane Eyre people, and everyone falls into one of those two categories. So it sounds like you're a Pride and Prejudice person, which is excellent. I'm a Jane Eyre person, but I think we can get along.
And finally, Faith is also a book writer. She's written a novel called Christmas Carol, and that's Carol with a K, right?
That's right. Carol is her name. So it's a modern retelling of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. But the Scrooge character is reimagined as a workaholic mom. And so her name is Carol. And then the book is called A Christmas Carol. So I had it with a C, and then the publisher asked if we could change it to a K to differentiate from A Christmas Carol when you're like searching it online. And I said that was fine. So now she's Carol with a K. And actually, I have a friend whose name is Carol with a K. So I think that works out really well.
That makes sense. And she's also the author of a nonfiction book called Saving Cinderella: What Feminists Get Wrong About Disney Princesses and How to Set It Right. And that book is how I first found Faith. I think I saw someone recommend it on X, and so I bought it and listened to the audiobook version. And it's what inspired me to ask her to come on as my guest today. So, Faith, can you tell us just a little bit about Saving Cinderella and what inspired you to write it?
Yes. So the book is about the way in which the Disney princess movies, of which I think at this point there are 12, maybe 13, have been kind of taken over or got taken over in, let's say, the early 2000s, early 2010s by what I call princess critics. And these are people who grew up with these movies in what is called the Disney Renaissance, as I'm sure you know. So starting with The Little Mermaid, moving through Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, et cetera, et cetera. They grew up with these films and loved them. And then in their young adulthood, early 20s or so, had what many of them describe as a sort of feminist click moment. And they realized that these movies are anti-feminist because they're all about princesses waiting around, as they would say, for a man to come and rescue them. And there is no agency, they would say, in these princess stories. And so they took to the internet, they took to major publications like the New York Times and, others like it, and wrote op-ed after op-ed and post after post trashing the princess narrative, the idea of a fairy tale princess finding her man. And this then became the accepted narrative about princesses. And even people who kind of love these movies or, are parents and they're kind of thinking, I watched these movies as kids. Shall I show them to my own kids now? Even those people will say like, well, I know it's really bad, but I love Ariel. Or like, I know it's really not appropriate, but I love Cinderella. And so the narrative is that it is a given that these movies are bad for little girls. They tell a story about women that is unhelpful, outdated, and anti-feminist. And this book is here to tell you that that is not in fact true at all. That the earlier princesses, starting of course with Snow White, all the way up through, I would say, Belle, are the best princess role models for little girls, young women, and that in fact, when Disney, as it did, took on the persona of the princess critics and started trying to make films that answered the questions and the critiques of these people, I'm thinking films like Brave, like Frozen, pretty much anything. I mean, you start to see it with Aladdin in Princess Jasmine, and then it kind of continues on from there. And there are a couple of exceptions like The Princess and the Frog and Tangled. But when they try to quote unquote correct the sins of the past, right, of these other movies, they in fact make princesses who are far more passive, far more in need of rescuing, far more superficial than the princesses of the past. So that's what the book is about. And it just goes through each movie in chronological order. And I show you what people have said about the movie and why it's wrong. And we just go through we start with Snow White and we go through Elsa and Anna from Frozen, who are not, in fact, official Disney princesses, or at least weren't at the time. But that's where I stopped. I think I published it in 2018. So we hadn't had some of the other ones that have come after that.
Yeah. Have we had more princesses since then?
Well, there's Moana. I'm not sure if she qualifies as an...
Oh, yeah. I think Moana did get added to the lineup, which is funny because Moana, specifically says, I'm not a princess.
Right, exactly. No, all of these princesses will now say that they're not princesses. They don't want to be princesses, but they are princesses because princess gear sells like hotcakes, right? So the whole officialness of it is just a marketing situation where Disney grouped all these princesses together under the banner of the Disney Princess logo. And now they get to be Disney princesses. And I think the only reason that Elsa and Anna aren't official or weren't official at the time of the writing of the book was because they were making so much money on their own as Frozen that they didn't need to be part of the franchise. But, so I went with that because I felt like, well, at least this is some kind of official ruling about who's a princess and who isn't. But of course, there are others and there are other female characters. And some of the quote unquote princesses are not princesses, like Mulan has no claim to being a princess whatsoever, but she gets to be one of the princesses. But I just did those ones because I felt like this is a list that I can use that is not controversial, really.
Yeah, Mulan always confounds me. But like you said, it's a marketing thing.
Exactly.
If the character is popular enough to include in the princess official lineup, then she is a princess.
That's right.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed listening to this book. I'm a big audiobook person because I like being able to drive or do chores or whatever while I'm reading, so to speak. So yeah, I found it a really interesting read and did really make me go back and reevaluate what I thought of, especially some of those earlier princesses where we've kind of gotten this idea that they're just damsels in distress who just kind of sit around and wait for a man to come and save them. And if you actually go back and watch the movies, that's not really the case.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I also think that one of the big things, and I tried to convey this in the book, and afterwards I have written several articles trying to convey this as well, because it's such an important point, is that we as a society in a lot of ways have forgotten what a fairy tale is, how to read a fairy tale, because we take these stories like Cinderella or Snow White, for example, we take them so literally.
Right.
And that's where we get these notions of like, well, Sleeping Beauty is asleep for the entire movie. I mean, I think she has like 18 lines of dialogue and she's in the movie for like 16 minutes or something like that. So we say, like, how can this possibly be, a feminist woman or something like that? Because she's asleep for the entirety of the movie. But in reality, fairy tales, which have been around for hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years, operate within a very specific symbolic system in which these things that appear from story to story, like falling asleep and needing to be woken up with a kiss, like the apple that Snow White eats, like the woods that so many of them take place in, like mirrors, all of these things that show up in these various fairy tales are not only literally a mirror or literally an apple, they are also symbols of other things. And for a princess story, usually what is going on in that story symbolically is that we are watching a young girl transform into a woman, usually via romantic love, because girls become women just sort of physically and realistically by going through puberty and becoming able to have children. Right. And so that's why the man is part. So there's a whole, which I won't get into here, but you can read the book or you can read these articles. But, there's a whole world of fairy tale symbolism that is very, very present, particularly in the early movies when Disney was at the helm. I think he really understood this. So they're very, very present in those early movies. And even in some of the later Renaissance movies, that symbolism is very, very present. And if you don't even know about it, then you can't read these movies correctly. And that's where you get these very literal interpretations of the movies where you say like, oh, well, she's just waiting around for a man or whatever it is.
Yeah. And who would just take an apple from a random old lady in the woods?
Exactly. Exactly. Who would do that?
Yeah, and it's interesting that there was kind of a backlash, or at least what Disney interpreted as a backlash against stories that centered romantic love, and that they've tried to get away from that. And I like a lot of their movies that are, about family relationships
Sure.
or friendships as well. But lately, I've been seeing so many videos and posts and things from people lamenting that there hasn't really been a Disney love story animated since Tangled. You could argue Frozen, but it's really the side story and not the focus of the movie. And especially with Wish that came out for the 100th anniversary, it's come out that there was initially going to be a love story between Asha and what was going to be like a star boy instead of just the little cute star character who
She can't fall in love with him.
they probably hoped to sell plushies of.
Yeah.
But there's so many people that are just really genuinely upset that that did not happen. So it feels like people want to go back to what Disney used to be.
That's exactly right. I mean, we want the love story. We love the love story. And we love it because intrinsically we understand what it means. A princess story. I agree with you. There have been lots of great Disney movies that didn't have love stories because they weren't about love. They weren't about princesses. But a princess narrative is a very specific thing. And if the princess stays at home with mom and dad at the end of the movie, which is what happens in Brave, or decides that her sister is the focal point of true love's kiss, as happens in Frozen, if that happens, it completely corrupts and subverts this symbolic narrative, which is about coming into your own as a woman via romantic love. And that's not really okay. You can't really do that. Whereas you can just tell a completely different story about, people in their family. You can tell The Incredibles or whatever you want. You can tell a superhero story. That's fine. But if you're going to tell a princess story, it has to include that in it. And we feel upset and frustrated if it doesn't. And we all love a good love story. Like, what's wrong with it? Like, everybody wants love in their life with whoever it is that you fall in love with. Everybody wants love. So there's there's no reason to categorically classify love, romantic love, as somehow outdated or anti-feminist or something like that. That's ridiculous, but that's how far they've gone. That's where they've gone to. Is, well, any version of there being a love interest for our female character reeks of some outdated thing because maybe he's going to come in and somehow save her. And it's ridiculous. And it's why I think they keep remaking the old movies. That's why they keep making the live action classics over again, because people love those movies. They can't enter the minefield of creating new ones and potentially get blasted by people for, oh, but this is so outdated or whatever. But they can bring back movies that people love, even though they admit, though, there's something wrong with them. And of course, then they try to quote unquote fix the problems of the past by making the movies incomprehensible. I mean, that's what happened in The Little Mermaid one, is like they changed things because they thought they were outdated, and then the plot made no sense anymore. So I think, that's what they're doing now, is they're scrambling. They're trying to walk this tightrope between, well, actually, we love those old stories, those princess stories, those love stories. We love them, but you can't make new ones because also we hate them.
Yeah, and it's an interesting moment right now with the Snow White live action remake that has really bombed. And, it seems like people are making it known that we're not interested in having Snow White fixed,
Exactly. And what hubris, right? I mean, here is this movie that was the absolute gold standard of feature animated in entertainment. That was a completely new genre, right? The feature length animated film. And, to say like, oh, that was wrong and bad, and we can do it so much better by having Snow White. Like, I haven't even seen it. I can't bring myself
I haven't seen it either.
to watch it, but it's like whatever, she takes over the castle or something. Like by having Snow White rouse the peasants to revolt. I don't know why. What does that have to do with anything? So it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, I still can't believe they even touched that one, but
Exactly.
So, when I invited you to be my guest, I was really hoping that you would choose a song from Cinderella.
Oh, good. I'm glad I did. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
you did. Part of the reason for that is you have some really interesting thoughts about Cinderella in the book, particularly about her having not just that fairy tale symbolism, but also some symbolism around her that kind of mirrors Christ.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So, first of all, I would just want to give you the caveat that, first of all, I'm not a biblical scholar. And second of all, that I am not trying to make the case at all that Cinderella is somehow Jesus Christ. Okay.
Right.
Because I think that sometimes when I go into what I'm about to go into, people get a little mixed up. So, I just want to be clear, Cinderella is not Jesus Christ. And also, I'm not going to delve very deeply into the entirety of the Christ story in the Bible. However, the first thing to note is that Walt Disney himself, was provably a Christian, and that he provably believed that infusing his work and his movies with his Christian values and his idea of Christianity was a part of his job. That's what he was trying to do with a lot of these movies. And so I think the first thing we need to look at is, for just a second, that the princess symbolism of Cinderella, because we get it wrong so often. But very, very briefly, the idea of this girl in rags who magically is transformed such that she wears this beautiful ball gown and then goes to a place where she falls in love at first sight with a man who falls in love at first sight with her is not, oh, you just need a pretty dress and then a rich man will fall in love with you. Instead, what it means is Cinderella is someone who is beautiful on the inside, but is not ugly on the outside, but is, she's in rags. She's not noticeable on the outside. But she is, and we're specifically told this in the movie and, of course, in the fairy tale as well, she is obviously a beautiful, pure, virtuous woman on the inside. And what the fairy godmother does is she makes Cinderella's inner beautiful self visible on the outside to other people. So she becomes on the outside what she already was on the inside. And this is why little girls love that moment so much. They can't articulate that to you, of course. But the reason that little girls play that moment of transformation where the fairy godmother says, you shall go to the ball, and she becomes, this beautiful princess, is because that makes sense to us. It makes sense that inside of us is something that we can't show to other people, that it's impossible for other people to see. But this is a moment where that happens. And so because she's wearing her inner beauty on the outside, when she gets to the ball, the prince can fall in love with her at first sight because he sees everything that she is. He sees everything that she is on the inside made manifest on the outside. And that's why they fall in love. And she sees him because, he hasn't had that same transformation. But as a prince in a fairy tale, he is the perfect man. That's what a prince means. So there's that sense of transformation that is going on in the story of an inner self that is being revealed to the world. So the movie itself overlays a sort of Christian lens that I don't know that the fairy tale really does. You can pull it out of the fairy tale, as Disney does in the movie, but it's very overt in the movie. And I will just sort of briefly explain why, and then you can go away and read the book if you want. But in the movie, we are told that Cinderella is a queen or a princess who has been pulled down from on high to be the lowly servant girl, Cinderella. But that inside, she is this princess for some reason that we're just sort of told in this introductory song. And I relate that to, here is God come down in human form to earth. And as she goes along, again, also that moment of transformation, which you get after the death on the cross of Christ, is sort of also that moment of, look, here I am, right? When Christ returns and we see him after the stone has been rolled away, et cetera, and he looks different, right? There's something about him after that moment that is not the same as the man that they knew when he was alive on earth. And we know that because they don't recognize him, right? And the stepsisters don't recognize Cinderella at the ball either. Cinderella also has a moment right before she is transformed of doubt, of feeling like, I can't believe anymore. She has had this whole theme of belief, this whole theme of her dream will come true, her belief will come true, her prayers will come true. And then, Jesus cries out on the cross, Cinderella cries out, and there's this moment, and then she is transformed. And then the sort of consummation of all of this for Cinderella is the love that she gets to experience with the prince. Also, there are all of these other things in it, like Lucifer the cat, right? His name is Lucifer. At the pivotal moment when Cinderella reveals that she has the glass slipper, she is, in fact, the princess, right? So, she also has this moment of she reveals who she is, but then she goes back to being the lowly servant girl, but then she reveals again that she, in fact, is Cinderella because she has the glass slipper. Mm-hmm. And at that pivotal moment, Lucifer the cat is vanquished by all of the sort of the disciples, the mice and the birds and everybody, right? So it's, it's not a direct correlation or anything like that. But I really believe that Disney was infusing this movie with ideas of redemption, grace, resurrection, those kinds of themes, and imbuing the fairy tale symbolism of coming into your own, becoming who you are supposed to be, et cetera, with that. And in doing that he infused the idea of true love, love at first sight, all of these things that we see in the princess movies that everybody is all up in arms about, today. He infused that idea with spiritual purpose because here on earth, the thing that we can do that brings us closest to God is love each other, right? And we're told that in the Bible, and he's showing us that in this story. So when I watched it for the book, and I'm taking notes and everything, I kind of was like, you can't argue with this really. It's there in the movie. So I hope people go away and watch the movie, or you can read the book or whatever it is, but it's really there. And so I think in terms of what you're doing when you're, looking at these films through a Christian lens, I mean, here's one that literally is giving us a Christian kind of allegory, essentially.
Yeah, it's funny. I've always wondered, like, why did they name the cat Lucifer?
Exactly.
And reading your book, I was like, "Oh, well, I mean, to the mice who are kind of like Cinderella's little followers, he is that roaring lion going about seeking whom he may devour," as the Bible says.
Right.
And yeah, watching it through that lens again, particularly that transformation scene with the fairy godmother, it made me think about the Mount of Transfiguration,
Mhm.
where Jesus appeared to some of his disciples as his true self, you might say. One of the passages that talks about it is Matthew 17. It says, "After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and brought them up to a high mountain alone, and was transfigured before them. His face shone as the sun, and his garments became white as the light." And it was interesting to me going back and reading that to realize that they specifically talk about his garments because we're talking about, again, Cinderella's dress being not just a dress, but a symbol of her inner princessness, her inner true self.
That's exactly right. And the funny thing is, when Cinderella became part of the Disney princess franchise that we were talking about, and if you buy a Cinderella doll, for example, or a Cinderella costume, her dress is blue. But in the movie, her dress is white. It's like a sparkling, kind of shimmery white dress. And, so again, it is that sort of that purity suddenly, that white purity of her soul is kind of suddenly revealed in that moment. So I think there is certainly a parallel there.
Yeah. It's funny. At my wedding reception, one of the members of our church came up to me and she had brought her children to the ceremony with her. And she said her little boy, who was probably like 3 or 4 at the time, when I came walking down the aisle, he turned to her and said, "Mommy, I see Rella." And
Yes.
I was like, "Oh, that's so precious."
Exactly.
So he agrees with you that the dress is white.
Yeah, the dress is white, and I think kids are constantly confusing brides for princesses, right? And I think that is, first of all, yes, they're wearing a fancy dress. Okay, fine. But I think it's really important also is that moment of I'm wearing this dress and I'm going down the aisle to meet the man that I'm going to, share my life with. And for a lot of people, and especially in the past, of course, it was the moment of transferring. We don't really think of it this way anymore, but it was the moment of transferring from your father to your husband. So it was the moment of growing up. It was the moment of leaving the house of your father, right? And cleaving to this man. And that also matters. These stories are about growing up. They're about leaving your home
Yeah.
and leaving behind something about your childhood, your family of origin, and entering into this new role of adult woman. And so that's part of it as well. So yeah, brides look like Cinderella for a reason.
Yeah, and if you think about it, weddings are full of symbols the same way that fairy tales are. You said we don't necessarily think about that this is the woman transferring from her father's household to her husband's household, but we have the father walking the bride down the aisle,
Exactly.
taking the veil off or, giving her hand to the husband and things like that. So it's all still there in our culture and our symbolism, but we've kind of pushed back on the reality of it.
Right, exactly, yeah, and I think all of those symbols, we know how to read, we know how to read those symbols just like we know how to read the fairy tale symbols, but we've forgotten, and in the same way that we know what it means that she's wearing white, for example, we know what it means that, yeah, that the father walks her down the aisle, but even people who would completely disavow that worldview still wear the white dress, they still have their father walk them down the aisle,
Right.
because these things have become divorced from each other, but we really do know what they mean
Right.
if we think about it. We really do.
So, before we get into your song choice from the movie Cinderella, I want to talk just a little bit about the history behind the movie itself. Cinderella was the first princess movie that Disney made after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it's kind of funny that the name of your book is Saving Cinderella because you could definitely argue that Cinderella saved Disney. Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi, as much as we love them today and see them as masterpieces, they were all commercial failures at the time. And so the studio was several $1 million in debt by the late 1940s. They were kind of on the verge of bankruptcy. Roy Disney at that point was trying to convince Walt to just sell the studio, cut their losses, and retire. But Walt really wanted to make at least one more animated feature film. And after arguing back and forth for a few weeks, Roy gave in, thankfully.
Yes, thank you.
And that film ended up being Cinderella. And that came out in 1950. And thankfully, Cinderella was both a commercial and a critical success. And if it hadn't been, who knows if we would have gotten any of the wonderful Disney movies that we got afterwards, or even Disneyland and Disney World and all of these parks. That might have been the end. Who knows?
It's amazing. I mean, we wouldn't know the name of Disney at all, but it was such a good choice because I think Cinderella is such a universal story, and so many cultures around the world have Cinderella stories, and it's a plot line that's been around for thousands of years. So, if you're going to choose a story to tell to try to save your, struggling entertainment company, I feel like Cinderella is a good bet.
Yeah. And kind of going back to their roots, going back to what worked in the beginning.
Right.
Started with a fairy tale. Let's go with a fairy tale. The film also led to the launch of the Walt Disney Music Company, and the record album for it ended up hitting #1 on the Billboard pop charts. So the 6 songs composed by songwriters Mac David, Jerry Livingston, and Al Hoffman definitely played a big part in the success of the movie and also its merchandising, which we know merchandising is a big part of Disney's success now. It's not just the movies, it's what can you sell attached to the movies.
Absolutely.
And one of those songs, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, was even nominated for an Academy Award for Best Song. Didn't win, but it was nominated. But that's not the song that we'll be talking about today. Instead, the song that Faith has chosen for us to discuss is...
So This Is Love.
Yes. So This Is Love, also known as the Cinderella Waltz because it is written in 3/4 time. And it's sung by Eileen Woods as Cinderella and Mike Douglas as the prince. What was interesting to me as I rewatched the movie a couple days ago, I hadn't seen it in a while, was these are the first words that we hear out of the prince's mouth is as he's singing along with Cinderella to this song. He's really not in the movie a lot.
Yeah, that's right. And usually you get that criticism, right, about the movie that she just, who knows who this person is, and she falls in love with him, and why do we care? And of course, all the sort of modern reimaginings or refilmings of this story give you some backstory for the prince. But in a fairy tale, the prince doesn't need to have any backstory because he's not really a character. He's a symbol.
Right.
He symbolizes the fact that she's ready to become an adult woman. And the fact that he's a prince means that he's the right guy for her. He's the perfect man. And so in the world of fairy tale symbolism, he doesn't really need a backstory.
Yeah. It's funny too because somehow the YouTube algorithm knew that I was thinking about this, as it does. And it gave me a video of someone kind of defending Prince Charming. And she kind of went into like, if you really analyze even the little bit of him that you see on the screen, he's very, and it's mostly during this song, right? And just after it, and a little bit before where he's yawning,
Yeah.
at his father, like, you're trying to make me fall in love. This is not working.
Yeah.
But, she pointed out like his interactions with her are very tender, very wholesome, very respectful, very sweet. And again, it's funny to hear someone who obviously has a very modern mindset, but really saying, oh, this is really nice.
Yeah. Well, I think people do kind of tie themselves in knots trying to say that these princesses or these princes are quote unquote okay when they've forgotten the symbolism that is meant to go with these stories. So they've been told like this is wrong and bad. She falls in love with this guy that she met literally half a second ago, and he falls in love with her having seen her for perhaps 5 seconds previously. And that's not okay. It's not okay to do that. You don't run off. You could be a stalker. You don't run off with somebody that you just met. And movies afterwards make fun of this, right? Like Kristoff says to Anna in Frozen, you're going to marry a man you just met. And that's
Right.
supposed to be a kind of zinger towards those old movies. But then it's like, but actually, I really like that movie, right? So the people are like, this is terrible. She falls in love at first sight. No, bad. He could be a stalker. But I really like Cinderella. So how can I justify my like of her? Well, I'm going to really carefully analyze the 3 minutes that he's in the movie or whatever, whatever 10 minutes that he's in the movie and say all these things, which are true that, yes, he clearly has kind of a sense of humor in the sense that he's sort of yawning through the presentation of these women. He also is not particularly interested in the finery of the women. So we are supposed to feel, I think, that, his yawning through the whole thing is an indication that he cares less about people's money and social standing and more about their inner selves. And he's very kind to Cinderella, and he's lovely, and he's a very good dancer, and he's handsome. And, and he notices when her shoe falls off and all of that. So, he's a good guy. But I think we don't need to do any of that. We can be like, yeah, we know he's a good guy because he's a fairy tale prince. That's what a fairy tale prince means.
That's what he is.
Exactly.
So it's a pretty short song. I'm just going to go ahead and read all the lyrics out for us. I'm going to skip over the humming parts.
You should sing it. I think you should sing the whole thing.
No.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. So this is love. So this is love. So this is what makes life divine. I'm all aglow, and now I know. And now I know. I want to start singing it.
Sing it. Do it.
I'm not going to do it. The key to all heaven is mine. My heart has wings, and I can fly. I'll touch every star in the sky. So this is the miracle that I've been dreaming of. So this is love. So right off the bat, for me, I notice how many allusions there are to Christian ideas, like you said, just in those lyrics. There's the word divine, heaven, miracle. Not a lot of words in that whole song, and 3 of them are kind of religiously loaded words.
Yeah, and if you wanna add love to it, you can do that too, right? I mean, love, love. Like, how many times does it say love in the song? Like, I don't know, a bunch. And right, that's what I have underlined, divine, heaven, and miracle. And I think it's intentional. I think there's a lot of things that you could say, right? I mean, this is what makes life divine. You don't have to say that. This is what makes life wonderful. This is what makes life worth living. This is what makes life beautiful. There's lots of things that you could put in there that are not divine.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's intentional that this language that very clearly speaks to a sort of, I guess we call it a Christian worldview or something like that, that speaks to that is there. And of course, these are things that we say in kind of common parlance. We say, oh, it was like heaven. This ice cream I ate was like heaven. And we don't really mean that like ice cream is heaven, right? Like we're not going to go to heaven and find that we're inside of ice cream. Maybe. But I mean, like that's not what we mean. So there is a kind of colloquial way of saying this, and miracle as well. We say, oh, it was a miracle that I made the bus on time or whatever. And we don't literally mean that God came down and caused this, although it could happen. But, so I think you could say like, oh, well, those are just turns of phrases,
Right.
It's just a turn of phrase to be like, this is heaven, it's a miracle. But like all of them at once, divine, heaven, miracle, love, this is what makes life. I mean, I just think that it's not a coincidence.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
So other than that, what made you choose this song?
Yeah, well, I think this is the song that kind of sums up the thing that I've been trying to say all this time about the movie. Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo is a really fun song, and I think I understand why it was nominated for an Academy Award, but
Not much to.
well, and it is playing or it is being sung at that moment of transformation.
Right.
But it doesn't really hold in it the idea that is going on in the transformation. I mean, it's basically a bunch of nonsense words and, some information about what's going on, right? Like what's happening. And, I think I could have chosen A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes because I think that does set up this concept of kind of praying for something and then believing that it will come. Like if you just believe, then you will receive the thing that you pray for. I think we could talk about that one. But this is the sort of culmination one. This is the one where we learn, okay, so if we, are good inside and we continue to be this princess on the inside and we wait for our moment and then we get transformed into the person that we always have known that we really are, and then we go to the ball, well, what? Not what do we get exactly, like in that sort of transactional way, but like what happens? What's the culmination of this moment, of this transformative moment? And I think this is the song that answers that. The culmination of this transformation is love. And I think this song is very clear about that if you become who you're really meant to be and you find the man who is who he is really meant to be, and you recognize that in each other via the symbol of true love, then that's what happens. It's love. And we love each other. And I think, in the fairy tale version of this, it's that we become women, we become adults. In the Christian interpretation of this, it's that, this is how we love. We love God as we love each other. And I think that's telling us this. I think this song is telling us this. So I picked it because I think it just sort of encapsulates the culmination of that thing, that sort of symbolic transformation that I was describing.
Yeah. I was thinking, obviously, at this point in the movie, they're not married, but they're falling in love. And we know that the end result of this is that they are going to be married. And so I was thinking about the fact that marriage and weddings are used so much, especially in the New Testament, but even in the Old Testament, as a symbol of God's relationship to us.
Yes.
The church is the bride of Christ. Jesus, maybe not directly, but obliquely refers to himself as the bridegroom several times. We have Ephesians 5, where Paul says the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head and savior of the church. And then he says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church. So he's making that direct comparison of this love that we have for each other, this earthly love, is meant to be a picture of God's love for us and vice versa. God's love for us should be a picture of how we should love each other. And like you said, love is the greatest commandment, right?
Yeah.
Love God, love your neighbor, love your enemy even.
Right. Exactly. No, I think that's all correct. Like, I think that it is all symbolically representing that in the same way that that metaphor is being used in the Bible of marriage to explain how God loves us, how Christ loves us, and how we are meant to react and interact with each other as well.
Yeah, and, I think in Revelation, where you have the wedding supper of the Lamb and the presentation of the bride of Christ, that will be our fairy tale moment of finally being completely what we are meant to be and what we have been made to be through. If Cinderella has the magic of the fairy godmother to transform her, we have the blood of Christ to transform us.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We, all of us, are Cinderella in rags, right? We, all of us, are not quite what we were meant to be because we live here in the world. And, we believe and we hope that a time is coming when we get to wear our beautiful ball gown, right? When we are suddenly revealed as the people that God intended for us to be when he made us, right? When he formed us in our mother's wombs, right? So that resonates, I think, with us, that feeling of, I don't know, certainly resonates with me, that feeling of like, oh, like I am not who I was supposed to be. There is a version of me that isn't quite playing out here on earth. And there is this promise of getting to become that person. And I think Cinderella is a really great allegory for that. It's a great way of kind of illustrating that thing that we all know to be true, that we have something inside of us that isn't somehow communicating to others, or it's somehow not visible. It's not quite right. We're not quite there in our current present lives.
Yeah, and I mentioned that, there's verses in the Old Testament as well that talk about this metaphor of marriage as being symbolic of God's love for us. And so just to read one of them, this is Isaiah 62:5, the latter half of the verse. It says, as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so your God shall rejoice over you. That was so beautiful.
Right.
And yeah, to think that God is going to rejoice over us, that we're going to be worthy of rejoicing over. We're going to be clothed in his righteousness like Cinderella was clothed in that that beautiful dress.
Yeah. Exactly. And that feeling that those of us who are lucky enough to be happily married, like that we remember of that moment of seeing, walking down the aisle, or if you're a man standing at the end of the aisle and seeing your beloved coming towards you, that experience of, oh, like there he is, there she is, that's that feeling of, oh, yeah, you're the one. You're the person that I want, and that verse that you read is sort of, that's how God is feeling about us, which is amazing, right? But yeah.
Yeah. So this is love, like
Right.
real love.
Yeah.
True love is always of God, and He wants us to share that love. And there's, like we've said, there's multiple different kinds of love. Romantic love is beautiful, and it's a beautiful thing in reality. It's also a beautiful symbol. But there are other kinds of love that are also beautiful. When Jesus told us to love one another, He wasn't saying romantically love everybody.
That's right. Yeah.
So we need to embrace that love of God and also share that love of God with the world. A simple little song, but a lot packed into it, just with that idea of love, and not just love, but divine love.
Yeah. And love is the power of transformation, right? Love
Yeah.
is what effects transformation.
Yeah, and that idea that you've pointed out is central to Cinderella, of becoming your true self and being seen and recognized for your true self. And thankfully, if there's no one on earth who ever sees our true self, we know that God sees our true self and loves our true self and wants to help us to transform into that righteous version of ourselves.
That's exactly right. That's it.
As we wrap things up, I'd like to read one more Bible verse that's come to mind as we've been repeating that phrase, "This is love." It's from 1 John, and I know we call 1 Corinthians 13 the love chapter. I think we should call 1 John the love book, because there's so much packed into it about God's love and about how we as Christians should live in and by that love. So I definitely recommend just going and reading the whole book. It's only 4 chapters, but I'll just conclude here with these 2 verses. Chapter 4, verses 10 and 11, which I think kind of say it all. "In this is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we must also love one another." So, Faith, this was an awesome conversation. Really enjoyed it. If my listeners would like to find you online or find your books or find out more about you, where can they find you?
Thank you. Well, I enjoyed this conversation as well. This was really fun. I think the best way to find me is via my website, which is faithkmoore.com. And you can find links to the podcast and the books and all of those things there. I'm also on X at Faith K. Moore, but that's not as interesting.
I will make sure to link to that website in the show notes, of course. And thank you again so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode of Showtune My Heart. Thank you again to my awesome guest, Faith Moore. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to check out her book, Saving Cinderella, as well as her podcast, Storytime for Grownups. In fact, right now on the podcast, she's actually doing a series of episodes for the summer all about fairy tales, including the latest episode that just came out, which is all about the history of the Cinderella story. And in that episode, she read some of the earliest written versions of the story, including the version by Charles Perrault, which is the one that the Disney movie is loosely based on. So if you'd like to learn more about the history and symbolism and importance of fairy tales, go give Storytime for Grownups a listen. Meanwhile, thank you for listening to Toon My Heart. And if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening. Give the podcast a 5-star rating, or maybe even take a minute or two to write a review. All of these little things can help new listeners discover the podcast, and your support just means so, so much to me. Until next time, or maybe I should say next once upon a time, may you live happily ever after.